Welcome back, everybody, to Santa Fe Fashion Week, Fast Behind the Curtain podcast. I'm really excited to have Jody on the line. Jody, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, sure. First, it's great to be here. Thank you. And I am a former park ranger who is now the self-proclaimed happiest podcaster on earth because I just get to do some amazing. I get to do some amazing work, and that includes a lot of podcasting. I do a lot of podcasting, but I also get to work with former executives who now have left the corporate world and they're building their own personal brand. So I'm happy to talk about any of that, but that's a quick rundown of who I am and what I get to do.
Sounds great. So what kind of caught my eye, we connected on Pod Match, and what caught my eye is you work for Disney and you do storytelling. And so I thought we'd talk about, you work with executives on telling their story, but how would that translate to, a lot of fashion houses, fashion designers? I believe, the best way to maybe grow their brand is by storytelling and brand building.
Yeah, you are exactly right. So a lot of the executives I get to work with have a big name behind them on who they used to work for. Disney, Hilton, Marriott, Universal, brands like that, very recognizable. But that alone doesn't cut it, or it doesn't have the appeal that it does when you understand how to take your personal stories from your time with those brands and then turn it into just a really compelling story that connects with other people. So, for example, a designer, I guess there are two pieces to this. One is the designs, the brands, all of that. Sure, that's a big deal. But to go with that is the designer's personal stories that people want to follow along with. They want to be part of. They learn more than just about clothing. Like there's a story behind the jacket. There's a story behind what's being designed. So that's where storytelling comes in place, that it's people can follow along with, people can be a part of, people become interested more in than the clothing. It's the whole story behind the clothing. It feels like you're part of something by wearing it. So when it comes to these executives that I mentioned I get to work with, yes, they have great names like Disney behind them, but then what happens after? And a lot of it is taking stories from their time at the big name company and then being able to tell their story in a way where people want to be part of what's going on. People want to be part of the design in this case, or I think it's the stories that make people feel connected to the designer as a person, the executive as a person, and then you want to be part of what's going on.
That makes a lot of sense. I recently did an interview with a woman that she has a bra and underwear company, but what she was started doing was she created a community first. I think it was like a community of 2,000 women. And then as she rolled out the product, she was able to send the products out to some of that community. They were able to try it on and then get feedback, but also it was the founder's story. So I think that, like you said, it's, you rent a piece of clothing, great, you bought it Dillard's or JCPenney's or Men's Warehouse, whatever. But if there's a story behind it and you're an emerging designer or even an established designer, I think that journey from the fashion designer and connecting with the consumer.
Yeah, that's right. I spent many years as a park ranger, and every park has trees and trails. So what's the difference? I could go hike here, I could hike there. Usually the three things that sets one park apart from another is the staff, the service, and the stories. Because if someone comes to your park and they can create stories, either the stories that they learn by being there at your park or stories that they earn by something they do at your park, that's why people come back year after year, month after month. And it can be the same in what you just said. It's not. So you could buy an undergarment, a shirt, a jacket, anywhere. Options are endless. But when the story you gave, when you're part of a community, you're part of something special, it's not just a shirt. It's something more special. I was part of a community that helped lead to the design of this shirt. I was one of the first to get it. That's actually one of the reasons why there's a comic strip called Oatmeal, which I had not read much of, but they several years ago designed a board game called Exploding Kittens, which since has become wildly popular, and they have created many more games since then. Exploding Kittens was their first one, and they launched it on Kickstarter. And the more backers it got, the bigger the rewards. And in the end, you got a personalized box. You got like a card with your name on it. It was really cool. You felt like you were part of something. And the result, once you got the game, it was just a card game.
Mm-hmm.
But being part of the community and part of the story that led to the creation of it, that's what made that card game so special.
Well, going back to working as a park ranger, working parts. I was talking to somebody the other day about the customer experience and how important that is. And I just posted a little video earlier today. I think her name's Jody Sanchez. She gives advice on TikTok. She's an I was a stockbroker. She worked on Wall Street, and she gives advice about owning boring businesses like laundromats and things like that. And so she did a video about fashion boutiques and how they're only owned by how she phrased it, women that are married to rich men that want to feel like they own a business, which to me is a little insulting. But it goes kind of to like the customer experience. So if you go to a boutique or you go to Santa Fe Fashion, a fashion event, it really is about the customer experience as well. And some of these designers on their own boutique, so can maybe dig a little bit deeper into that, the customer experience.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about because we focused on it in parks, and I get to work with a lot of Disney executives. That is a big deal for Disney executives. Mm-hmm. And we actually had created a workshop called How to Build a World-Class Customer Experience. And I mentioned that not to plug or promote the workshop, but to tell you that you can come to the workshop, and what we end up working on is the thing that we can talk about that makes a difference right here. And that is to actually write out what a perfect day for your customer is. And then the rest of the workshop, we talk about how to create that. But anybody can do that. A boutique owner can write out what, if a customer came here and had the absolute best experience that they possibly could, what would that be? And you write it out word for word. You give names to the customers. You describe them walking through the front door, what do they see? Are there smells? Is there music? How are they greeted? How are they helped? What questions are they asked? All of that. You write it out from the moment they enter the door. I would even say perhaps before they enter the door. What do they see as they walk up to the door? That's part of the customer experience. How are they greeted? But then when they leave, what's that like? And in the story, talk about a purchase. Why did the customer decide to buy that particular shirt? Make that part of the story. How did the actual transaction go? Did it feel like a transaction where they just handed over their credit card and you swiped it? Or was the whole thing just part of solving a problem? They walked in the door where they had an issue, they needed something specific, and they left your store just feeling like not only did they find the shirt that they needed, but they're so excited about it. They're going to tell the story about the shirt. They're going to say, you won't believe the experience that I had at this little shop in Santa Fe. That's what you're going for. And I think you get that. Yes, customer service training matters. A lot of things matter, but it all begins with writing out the story, and you describe even the things you think might not matter, the lighting, the positioning of where the clothing is. You write all of that out in the story. And then once that story is done, you do everything you can to make it come true.
That's a good point. It's interesting, even from going to a physical boutique or an online purchase. I think all of us have probably bought something online, and the experience has been less than perfect, right? Because if the item doesn't fit, returning it is a struggle. And then there's a lot of things, as if you're selling online, you don't have control over, like you might as your employees at your boutique. You go to the post office. What was that experience like? Was the box damaged when it got to your house? So trying to control as much as you can. It brings you to, I'm a big fan, of Einstein's Bagels, and I lived in Las Vegas, Nevada for a long time. And then whenever I travel, I think my family and whoever I was dating at the time thought it was ridiculous, because I drive by a bunch of restaurants wherever I was staying at, let's say Miami, to go to Einstein's Bagels. I'm just a big fan of their bagels and their coffee. And I told, I think it was a district manager in Vegas when I was living there at the time, like, everywhere I go, every Einstein's I go to, everybody's so friendly. And he goes, the founders of Einstein's Bagel worked first in hotels and hospitality. And they said, yeah, they're in the hospitality business, just so happens that they're selling bagels. And I think that holds true also, be it Disneyland or Disney World or whatever, or a fashion boutique is, the item you're selling is clothing, if you will. But again, it goes back to that customer experience.
Yeah, what a great way to look at it. In the hospitality business, we just happen to be selling bagels. That is true no matter what industry you're in. If you take that approach, even accountants can take that approach, but certainly designers can take that approach. We're in the hospitality business. We're in the business of making people feel and look good. And that is hospitality. That's the people business, is making people feel and look good. And if you understand that's the purpose of what you're doing, I think it changes the approach you take with whether it's online or whether it's in a storefront, an actual physical location, in the way that you approach your personal brand. If my name's attached to it, well, here are the standards, because my name is on it. So this is what we're going to do, because or the name of the storefront. I mean, it doesn't have to be your personal name. But when people talk about us, this is what I want them saying. And if they're going to say that, we have to live up to that. So I think that is the key to making it work, to build a brand that people talk about, is to understand what you're really in the business of. Yes, you may design clothes, but what is that? Here is an example. So one of the people I work closest with he was the executive vice president of Walt Disney World for a decade. And the way he would explain it is, at Disney World, everyone has a different role, meaning job. You could sell ice cream bars. You could be a custodian. You could work one of the rides. You could be even in purchasing. That's your role. But your purpose is to make sure every visitor, every guest, has the best vacation of their life. So if you understand that I'm only in this role to serve the purpose, then if I'm custodian, I can step out of my role and walk someone to what they're looking for. If your purpose is to make sure a guest has the best vacation of their life, you will do things that you would not do if you were a custodian only, if you stuck to a job description on what your role is. So that there's a big difference in just performing your role and performing to your purpose.
That makes a lot of sense. Going back to, working with executives and storytelling, I have to talk about, my dream was to be like the Anthony Bourdain of fashion. He would travel and, food and culture, and I think fashion and culture, but also let's say your business background has a lot to do with the way I think we think and act sometimes. I often tout that as a Merrill Lynch stockbroker, and some people are like, oh, you bring that up. And I think in my eyes, it's difficult to get that kind of career. You have to pass a very difficult tests, and then the way you look at investments, going through the Merrill Lynch program, stuff like that. And I think in your situation too, working with executives, and a lot of people that get into the business of fashion, they're older. They've had their, maybe they didn't follow their passion like myself. But when I was younger, I enjoyed photography, and I kind of put that on the shelf and got a real job, if you will. And I think a lot of people as they get older, it's still kind of tugging at them or nagging at them, like, yeah, you're meant to be a creative person, let's say. And so with that said, what is a journey with your people? And then are you like, is it more documentary, like utilizing TikTok and LinkedIn, stuff like that? Is this when you're telling the stories, or how are they utilizing what you're kind of educating these people?
Well, here's a good example. We've mentioned Disney a lot, so I'll use Disney. Let's say you've had a wonderful 30-year career at Disney. And now what? You want to continue working afterwards because you've got so much experience, you want to help other people. So what do you do with that? You have 30 years. So that's this much information and experience. What do you do with it? Well, you have to funnel it down to find the right stories, the right words, the right lessons that connect with people. So that's always the first step, is understanding in 30 years, you can't just get on stage and talk through your entire career. There's not enough time for that, nor would it be all that interesting. But if you find the right stories that connect with people, you start pulling those out all throughout your career. Maybe one in the very beginning, a lot towards the end, some in the middle. So you find all of those, and you find lessons that go with stories. And what I like to do is go through an entire career and find those stories and find those lessons, and then start to say, okay, these stories pair with these lessons. I'm simplifying that, but that's essentially how it works. You then have some stories to tell, and you have your pillars of content that, okay, these are my three main things. And whether I'm on stage, on a podcast, writing a book, writing an article, doing social media posts, they're probably all going to fall under these three things that I now talk about. That's what I'm an expert in. So once you understand that, then when you go on a podcast, this is what I'm going to talk about. You create your presentations based on your pillars of content. You perhaps write your book based on that as an outline. So that's where it begins, is you have all this experience, all of these stories, and you have to now mine through that and extract the right things that can take this 30-year corporate career and package it in a way that you can put on the shelf, and then people will want to buy it. Now, saying put on the shelf so people want to buy it, I know presentations don't work that way. That's not, but you get the understanding that you can't just put 30 years of experience on a shelf and people say, oh yeah, tell me about that. You have to take enough out, and you have to package it in a way where people now want to consume it, want to buy it, buy your book, listen to your speech, listen to your podcast. Just like a podcast is quite often a big part of telling your story and helping people understand what you're an expert in.
I think it's interesting. I'm really leaning into the whole podcasting about, I always look back and like during COVID, I didn't really do so much. I was doing more like podcasts, but just on YouTube, and didn't really take it that serious. And then I think I was visiting my son, and he had something going on in the back, a kind of a long playing podcast. But I think what's happening is, I'm on TikTok as well, but that's really kind of a fast twitch. People looking at very fast. And then I like LinkedIn because I could link, put my stories, and then Facebook is another thing. But I think when people turn on a podcast, and you can really kind of go after a target market, if you will, mine's fashion, and people know they're going to listen for a while, if they're interested. So I like the long form of podcast and giving people in the fashion industry an opportunity to tell their story. And again, going back to like documenting that story. So are you preparing people for, again, these executives for like TED Talks, or when you say they have a product to possibly sell, what does that product look like?
So I love everything you said about podcasting, and maybe we can bounce back to that too, because I think that's an important piece. But a product that they can sell, so it can be usually a presentation, it can be a workshop, it can be a book. So it often depends on what they want to do, because if someone has retired at 55, they may have different goals on how they're going to do this than someone that retired at 70. So part of it depends, because some of them will want to really build out a speaking business. Someone will want to be consultants, with a big difference being a speaker. I just show up and I talk for an hour or two, and then I leave, and then you feel inspired and you go do something about what you heard me talk about. Ideally, that's how it works. But a consultant, I would then come in and I actually work with you and make sure that things get done. Some are interested only in speaking, some consulting, some both. And it is often can be, all right, well, here's another way to look at it. You can't have 30 years at a company. I keep bringing up Disney, but we'll pick another one. Apple. I have not worked with anyone from Apple, but it doesn't work anymore that you just hang out your shingle and say, I worked for Apple for 30 years, now hire me. People also, now that will start a conversation because we're fascinated with a company like Apple or Disney or Universal. People are fascinated with that. So that will start a conversation, but it doesn't make people hire you for a speech or for consulting. You still have to, that starts a conversation of, hey, I'm interested, but what can you do for me? So that's why you have to say, I have 30 years at Apple, and here, based on my experience, is what I can do for you. This is what I'm an expert in. If you have that much time in the corporate world, you become an expert in something. But often, it may not feel like anything special to you. At Disney, they do not feel like exceptional guest service is anything special, because they spent 30 years in it. That's just how we do things around here. And you don't think it's all that special because you've done it every day for 30 years. But you do know a thing or two that can help a lot of other people. It's just a matter of figuring out, this is what I've done exceptionally well, documenting it. Can you create processes around it? Can you write a book about it? Can you put it in a form you can teach other people? There's a difference between a presentation, a speech, and a workshop. Is this something you can go into organizations and do workshops about and give them takeaways that they can work on it right then? And when you leave, they're better off than when you got there. That's different than just giving an inspirational presentation. We did a workshop. It was me and 3 Disney executives. We did a workshop in Orlando recently called Stories That Work. And it was all about the idea of how do you implement stories into your business in a couple of different ways to inspire your team or to connect with customers. And even if you have policies, procedures, guidelines, yeah, you can just get in front of your team and rattle them off and no one's going to pay attention, or you can wrap it in the form of a story so people understand how it actually works. Well, that came from working with some Disney people who had some expertise in, 1, storytelling, and 2, implementing stories into the workplace. And so we did a workshop on that topic. So that's the sort of things that we package together. And I use, package may not be the right term, but it fits, right? Because you can't just get up and talk for 4 hours. This workshop was 4 hours. you can't just, I mean, you could. I don't know how interested people would be. Just get in front of people and ramble and tell stories for 4 hours. That's one thing. But to conduct a workshop about storytelling and how to use it in the workplace, to me, that's a packaged product that you can do over and over again.
No, I think, one of the things you really touched on, and I obviously do it for a living, is consulting. I go way back to the 80s, and, being a salesman, which I don't really feel like you sell anything to anybody, either they want it, they don't want it, but consulting them and finding their pain points. A friend of mine, I think it was called the Sandler Systems or something like that. And he talked about sales and peeling back the onion. A lot of times when you meet with people, they won't be that forthright with like what struggles they're having, and so you really got to peel back to find what the heart of the problem is to maybe get them to move in a certain direction, if you will. But I think consulting, going back, obviously this is about fashion, but consulting as well, because you'll have stylists and photographers and social media managers. And oftentimes, I think people are fooled into the fact that, I have a camera phone, so therefore I can do this, or I could be a photographer and my friend's a hair and makeup artist. And again, not everybody has a big budget to do a big thing, so to bring in consultants and stuff like that. But I think, again, going back to podcasts and letting people know that, again, not selling anybody, but hey, if you have this problem, I could possibly help you solve that problem and consult people. And I think that's what people are looking for. I often get annoyed, people, I get a lot of calls like, oh, you need a website builder or a LinkedIn, people will connect with you and right away they want to sell me something, and I'm a big fan of Google and YouTube, search engines. Like if I felt like I had that problem, I would search you out. But then again, you have to have the presence to be on the internet where people can search you out to help you solve that problem. And then also I think podcasts and doing other social media things, it keeps you front of mind, just like McDonald's, right? So you're out there and maybe one day you don't have a problem and now you become big and you're like, wow, I really got this problem with storytelling or creating a cool social media campaign for a fashion designer or fashion house, and being that consultant that can maybe help them through that obstacle.
Well, yeah, you're onto something here, because there's a couple ways to you want to be recommendable, so good enough at what you do that people recommend you. Then you also have to be referable, where it's easy for people to find you. Because if I want to recommend you, but I don't know where to send people to find out more about you, then you're not very referable. And I feel like a good presence on having a good website, being in on the right social media channels, which could be LinkedIn, it could be Instagram. It depends on what you're doing. And then a podcast to me, there's nothing like it, because people get to know you. The people that listen to this show have got to know you in ways they wouldn't just following you on LinkedIn. And they hear the stories, they feel what's going on. But I'll tell you, my favorite part about podcasting isn't even that. And that's tremendous. But what I like, and you've probably felt this, when you have to show up every week to either have something to say about your topic or be sharp enough about your topic to hold a great conversation, you start to learn a lot about yourself. You become really sharp at your topic. You start to understand what you believe in and how to talk about it. And the better you get at that, the more recommendable and referable you become. And that has just been my favorite part about podcasting. And I've been doing it for 11 years now. My first show, which is still going, is the Park Leader Show, a podcast for park rangers, which just shows if you can have a podcast for park rangers and keep it going for 11 years now, it doesn't matter what topic you talk about. There is an audience for it out there, for fashion, for, my goodness, florists. It doesn't matter if you show up and talk about it. And there are people that are like, that's exactly what I've been looking for. There are 2 podcasts for park rangers now, and I helped the other podcast get started because I thought How there just has to be more. So I helped him get his show started. But in the 11 years, I wouldn't say the show has grown a lot. It's, as far as number of listeners, it's been pretty flat for many years. But the people that do listen, they're loyal. They love the show. I hear from them. They just great compliments. And to me, that's, I mean, can it get better than that? To that feedback from a loyal audience, for me, is better than a big audience, because I'm talking to the exact right people that need to hear what we're talking about. And you can accomplish that with a podcast. As a designer, you can build a brand around your name and the work that you do through a podcast, or even through a YouTube channel or whatnot. But what I like a little bit more about podcasting, if you look what people are doing while they're watching a YouTube video, they're quite often sitting at their computer, laying on their couch, looking at their phone. And that's fine. YouTube videos get a tremendous amount of traffic. But with a podcast, look at what you're doing when you listen to a podcast. Walking your dog, driving to work, doing the dishes, pulling weeds in the backyard, intimate life moments. And you get to be with people during that. And that to me, that is the big benefit of an audio podcast, is what people are doing while you are with them.
No, it makes a lot of sense. It almost comes full circle, because going back to you being a host of a podcast, it really is about a community of people, like-minded people. And, going back to like cable television, you could really hone into, if you're into news or, into sports or cooking, your podcast is really that, and you can have your own channel. So I love the community aspect of it. Also, like you mentioned too, is, the more people I interview in different parts of our industry, the more educated I get, because I'm learning from them. And again, the community keeps growing. And the other thing too is, essentially, so I joined Podmatch. It's been probably about 4 or 5 months ago. And I think it's a great platform. The challenge I have as someone in the fashion industry, there's not a lot of us out there. And so I'm going to plug something that I'm working on. Is I bought the domain name Fashion Podcast Connect. And it was only because I want to solve a need. Being an ex-stockbroker, I have no problem doing cold outreach and finding people that might be interested in doing my podcast. But there's, for someone that isn't like that, having a platform like Fashion Podcast Connect, where people could connect with each other and be on each other's podcast and really just hone in on that community.
Yeah, you're right. It is. I could say this the same if I, as a park ranger podcast. It's harder to find people that are going to talk about that very specific thing about parks and conservation. Same with you. It's harder to find people that are going to talk about design. But that's why people who listen appreciate it so much more, that it is specifically for them. I listen to a lot of business podcasts, leadership podcasts, and those are easy to find people to talk about business or leadership. Much harder to find park people, much harder to find design people. But that's why the audience becomes so loyal, that you are doing that work to bring in the right people to talk about their very specific topic.
Well, I think it's interesting. I'm old enough to remember, like when I was going to college, people these days, they talk about being self-taught, and I think the difference is, back in the 80s and before that, the only way to get educated, unless you picked up an encyclopedia at the old encyclopedias at Smith's or whatever, you had to go to school, and that was the funnel system. You had someone who knew something, and they would funnel it down to all the students, and that's how you get educated. And now with YouTube and podcasts and stuff like that, people like self-taught. I'm like, that you're not really self-taught. You learned it just through a different instrument, and it was through the internet.
Yeah, what a fun way to look at it. Yeah, self-taught, I guess, would be if I just went outside with no instruction and tried to build a fence.
Right.
Through a lot of mistakes, I would teach myself how to build a fence. That would be self-taught. But you're right. There's so many great resources out there that you're not self-taught. You just didn't sit in a traditional classroom to learn it.
I think anymore, like you buy a camera and like you said, you might fiddle around with it for a while, but then and I won't even read the owner's manual. I'll just go to YouTube and like how to do this or how to do that. And it's nice because people take the time out of their days to teach people how to use, build a fence or use a camera and stuff like that, or how to create a podcast. So I think I'll leave it on that. I really appreciate your time and being a guest on our podcast. I think there's a lot to learn about storytelling and brand building, customer experience. So I think these are really great topics.
Yeah, it was great to be here. It's I like to wear clothes, so fashion and design I appreciate very much. I've never had the chance to come and talk about it though, so I'm glad, I'm happy to have the chance to come and talk about how storytelling, brand building fits into the world of design. It's thank you for having me as a guest.
You're very welcome. It's interesting too, because some people will say, "Oh, I'm not really into fashion," but then again, you'll admire someone who's dressed sharply, right? So you might not you necessarily, but some people might not put a lot of thought into what they're wearing, but they certainly could tell when someone's dressed really, really sharp. So, with that, so thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.